Today's lesson appears in the Old Testament and also the New Testament. It's the same thing. I'm going to bait the hook in the New Testament as an example, and then I'm going to set the line in the water in the Old Testament and catch the fish. In the New Testament, we'll begin there. Jesus' enemy has brought a woman before him with a serious problem. It's the same problem that we're going to face in the Old Testament. And after the problem is solved and the lady is forgiven, here's what it says in John 8, verse 11. "Who condemns you?" said Jesus, talking to the woman caught in adultery. "No one, Master," she replied. "Neither do I," said Jesus. "Go on your way, and from now on, don't sin anymore. You don't have to do it again." If I mention two names in David's life, David was a king of Israel. What two names do you think would come to mind? Well, you're right. Goliath and Bathsheba. But both of them were poles apart in personality. Goliath, he was an ugly, cruel giant. Over against that, Bathsheba, she was a beautiful, gentle woman. Goliath, that man was an evil tyrant. Bathsheba, she was just an innocent victim. This giant and this woman, they're going to enter David's life at the opposite end of his manhood. David the Goliath occur when David is just a young man. He's only 19 or 20 years of age, just starting out in life, unknown, innocent, untested. The story of David and Bathsheba, it occurs when David is in his middle age, prime of his life. With Goliath, David is fresh and innocent. With Bathsheba, David is now the king. He's been battle-tested, has experienced, he's found failure, and he's also had disappointment. Our story begins in the spring of the year. David's army is out raiding neighboring tribes, and they plunder their towns, and they bring home the stolen goods. David, being the king, he isn't with them this time. He stays behind. But he's well established as king. He doesn't have to prove himself anymore in battle. Are you like that? You're older now. You deserve a break today. Isn't that what the world tells us? Isn't that the line? You earned it. Put your feet up. You can now enjoy it. One afternoon, when his army was away fighting, David was at home, and he was walking the palace roof. Down below, he could see the courtyards of the nearby homes, and he witnessed a woman. She was bathing, and she's beautiful. And he says to himself, wow, I wonder who she is. He likes what he sees. He sends for her. He takes her to his bed. And when that's over, he just sends her home. Her name is Bathsheba. Her husband, his name is Uriah. He's a Hittite. He's off fighting in David's army. He's a young lieutenant. And then a month goes by. Bathsheba learns that she's pregnant. And she sends word to David, 2 Samuel 11:5, I am with child. Watch what David does. He sends word to his general, fighting there in the front line. Give Uriah, one of our lieutenants, give him a month's leave. He's been a good soldier. He needs a little R&R, a little rest and relaxation. I want you to send him home. What does Uriah do? He doesn't go home. He goes back to the military barracks. Instead of going home and enjoying his wife Bathsheba. David can't believe it. What's wrong with that man? He was hoping for him to enjoy his marital bed, so he'll be responsible for the pregnancy. Uriah's a better man than David. He's loyal as a soldier. He doesn't feel good about enjoying his wife while his fellow soldiers are out there toughing it out on the battlefield. You won't believe what David does next. He sends Uriah back to the army division with a letter. It's going to be delivered to Joab, the general. And it's a registered letter sealed by the king's wax to be opened only upon arrival. It said, place Uriah in the front line where he'll certainly be killed. Joab carries out the orders. Uriah is killed in the battle the very next day. Word is sent back to David reporting his death. There's a time of mourning that passes. And when it's completed, David sends for Bathsheba. And he marries her. The baby is born, but the baby dies. Now begins our story. What started as a simple little gaze becomes an enormous sex and murder crime. How could that happen? Well, that's my lesson today, how it can happen. As this story unfolds, I've noticed that there's a simple little word that keeps popping up all the way through as you look at this story. Do you want to know what it is? It's only 4 letters, and it's the word send. S-E-N-D. It's a verb. I'll show it to you, and as I show you, I want you to follow along with me. And it's going to trace David's downfall. From love and obedience, it's going to hit right into cruelty and destruction and finally execution. And from one little verb to another little verb, David is going to slide all the way down to the bottom. Here we go. Follow the downfall. 1. David sent Joab, 2 Samuel 11:1. He sends his general into battle. It's the time when kings go forth to war. That's the first send. Here's the second one. David sent to inquire about Bathsheba when he saw this pretty girl over the ends of the wall, the rampart. 2 Samuel 11:3. 3. David sent and got Bathsheba to come to the palace. She gets pregnant. 2 Samuel 11:4. Now things begin to speed up. 4. So David sent word to Joab. 5. Send me Uriah the Hittite back to my palace. 6. Joab sent Uriah to David. When the cover-up is finally accomplished. 7. David sent for Bathsheba, and he married her. 2 Samuel 11:27. 7 times the word send appears. David was in control for all of them. 2 of them he didn't have much to do with. Bathsheba told David, I am with child. That was her, 2 Samuel 11:5. And Joab sent and told David about the news of Uriah's death, 2 Samuel 11:18. But those other 5, they were all David's downfall. So are these. Now comes the biggest use of the verb. 8, S-E-N-D, send. Who's going to send the next line? God is. God steps in. It's the final use of this little word. And the Lord sent Nathan to David. 2 Samuel 12:1. This last send, and it's going to show us what happens in a man's downfall. And it's been repeated over and over, all the way down through the ages. Have you ever seen it happen? Well, maybe not with this sin, but all sins are the same. Someone with power, he controls the life of somebody else that's lesser than those that are in power. And the downward possession of that verb, sent, is the same thing, maybe a different sin. But they all end up with a common bond. And that common bond is going to be forgiveness. The gospel story develops with that sin story. I'll explain it. This could happen to you. David has a pastor. His name is Nathan. He shows up now in our story. And he preaches a sermon to David. And David isn't even aware that he's the object of Nathan's sent. David isn't in a pew. Nathan isn't in a pulpit. God's name isn't even mentioned. Here was Nathan's sermon. Once upon a time, there was a rich man who had large flocks of sheep. And he throws an expensive feast. And the main dish for that feast is lamb chops. Instead of taking a lamb from his own flocks, he cruelly takes the pet lamb of a poor man just living up over the hill. He kills the lamb and he serves it up to his guests. David listens to this sermon, and as he listens, his anger begins to boil. He's outraged that such callous cruelty could happen right there on the farm. And he passes sentence on this rich man. This rich man should be put to death for such behavior. Then Nathan the preacher, he now lowers the boom. 2 Samuel 12:7. You, David, you're the man. You stole that poor man's lamb. Here comes Nathan's response to that pronouncement. David felt sorry for that poor man who lost that pet lamb. And he seethed with anger over the rich man who stole the lamb. And then suddenly, everything begins to come into focus. Uriah, his faithful, innocent soldier, fighting back there on that front line, away in the battle, leaving his loving wife behind, longing to be back with her, suddenly, like a thunderbolt, David kills him, and he becomes a murderer. He had just murdered an innocent man and husband, Bathsheba's little lamb, her loving husband. Then come these words from David's mouth. And these words belong to all of us. We're all going to have to say them sometime. I've said them, you've said them. If you haven't said them, you will. I have sinned against the Lord, 2 Samuel 12:13. He stops giving his opinions on other people's lives. He now sees his position before Almighty God. I'm a sinner, man in trouble, somebody who desperately needs help. He needs forgiveness. I have sinned against the Lord, said David. It's only a little sentence, but it's so full of hope. Because it's a little sentence that's really full of God. God is in the very center of that little sentence. Well, all of you have found out you can't avoid sin. It's impossible. We do it every day. But we can recognize sin. Sometimes sin is very camouflaged. David's lust for another man's wife, that's camouflage. There's an enormous amount of deception in that. Couple with that, the devil's deception. Everything gets compounded. We don't face sin because to us, it really isn't sin, is it? It's only an illusion. Wrong actions mean nothing to us because everybody's doing it. There's safety in numbers, so if we all do it, who cares? But when sin is discovered, when Nathan the prophet shows up, our guilty fears then produce a sense of condemnation. Have you noticed, though, in the David story, that it's really God's story? And God's story is Jesus' story? And guess what? Before long, condemnation gives way to grace, mercy, and then even forgiveness. When you sin, you become less, but your sin is taken away, and it's then that you become more. Old Malachi, that Old Testament prophet, he said it this way. Your honesty now shows up. I have sinned, but I can now come out in the open and I can talk about it. And the Son of Righteousness, who rides with healing in his wings, is going to be what they see in me. You're now no longer hiding indoors, huddled in denial. You've been set free. And that's the gospel. That's what Jesus called the good news. Let me tell you what sin is. You and I are fundamentally flawed. That's the human condition. But God created us, and he created us to be redeemed. And we've been now blessed by God, and we have been provided for by God. We are loved by him. Sin wants you to deny that. Avoid God. Wrongdoing is okay. Well, it's just the way of life. Get used to it. Just play into the pretend game. We sin so frequently, it doesn't even matter anymore. That's the condition that Nathan the prophet brings into focus here for David. David didn't need God. When he stared over that palace wall at that beautiful maiden down there in the courtyard, he didn't need God. When she got pregnant, he didn't need God. When he ordered the killing of Uriah, giving out commands of murder of an innocent life, David didn't bother him. Do you want to know the subtlety of sin? It doesn't feel like sin when you're doing it. It feels very fulfilling and very satisfying. That happens to be the replay of the events in the Garden of Eden. Satan told Adam and Eve, our first parents, you're not going to die. You're going to be just like God himself. You're going to be God. You can march right up to the throne and kick him off his seat and take over. Genesis 3, verse 4. David didn't feel like a sinner when he sent for Bathsheba. He felt like a lover. That's Hollywood. That's the high school prom. David didn't feel like a sinner. when he sent for Uriah. He felt like a king on the throne. Have you noticed what happens here? God is getting kicked out. Your obsession with self has now moved in. This story has a beautiful ending. After Nathan heard the story of that little lamb and David saw his sin, David sat down and he wrote a very stirring psalm describing the event of what he just heard from Nathan the prophet. When Nathan, sent by God, entered into David's life, after all these tumultuous events, David writes Psalm 51. Here are the highlights that he wrote. My God, huge in mercy, would you wipe out my bad record? Would you scrub away my guilt? Would you soak my sins in your laundry tub? I know how bad I've been. Right now, my sins are staring me down. And you're the one that I violated. You have seen the full extent of all my evil. I want you to give me a good scrubbing so that I can come out clean again. Give me a snow white life and make my broken bones once again do some dancing. Psalm 51 goes on, and that tells us the story of a changed man. Did you notice that David's sin, enormous as it was completely outdone by God's grace? Sin diminishes us. It dehumanizes us. Contrast that with David's forgiveness. In Lamentations, salvation is described as something new every morning, the rest of your life. Lamentation 3:23. Notice the gospel doesn't come as an accusation. It simply comes as an invitation. God is that close, inviting me in. Do you notice how I started our story? It started with Jesus talking to this very same element to a lady caught in adultery. And these wicked people that tried to condemn her, they left the scene. Jesus is all alone now with just that woman. We don't know her name. They call her the woman at the well. And they said to her, "Who condemns you?" She says, "No one, Master." Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go on your way. From now on, don't sin anymore. You don't have to do it again." John 8, verse 11. That story of Bathsheba and David is old, but you know it's right up to date because it's played out all the time. Thanks for coming to class. These are the things that we learn in class as we open the book. And the book is a great storyteller. And I want you to gather those stories and put them in the back of your mind. And I want you to learn from them because they're going to teach you and me how to become a better man and woman. I'll look for you next week. Come on back.